Right. Today I want to talk about the organs of the bankruptcy and also the phases of the different of the bankruptcy. So what phases the bankruptcy has to go through. We'll start with the court. So there's the bankruptcy court, which will decide. So we've got this courts where they can judge whether a person or a company, an organisation, the juridical subject is in actual fact bankrupt. And the other organ is the judge, which will sit in this court, the delegated judge, and he must look at the law. And if we remember, there's this law which says when someone or a subject, a juridical subject, is actually bankrupt. You know, for example, when they can't pay their debts in a regular way, they use, or maybe when there's indications, external indications of bankruptcy, like someone escaping, etc. So you've got the court and the judge. Then the judge will nominate a curatore. I've left it in Italian because obviously it's Italian specific to Italy. So the curatore must administer the patrimony, administer the organisation and all the assets together to try, to keep the operation running if it's still able to create wealth, if it's still able to continue to create an income. And also he needs to administer the actual process of the bankruptcy. So you've got him. And then there's the organ of the creditors, the committee of creditors, which is nominated by the delegated judge again, and they represent all the creditors. There are 3 or 5 members because you need a majority if there's a vote. You can't have a majority always with 4, for example, which represent all the creditors and will communicate with the other creditors decisions and possibilities, etc. They're only an advisory organ, they can't make binding decisions. So they will be consulted on, for example, the sales of assets and the approval of a distribution plan and the transactions, etc. But they can't make any binding decisions. They can only give their opinion on behalf of the creditors, their creditor perspective, shall we say. Okay, the phases of bankruptcy. So the first thing for a curatore is to do this opposizione dei sigilli, which is when the assets are formally taken out of the control of the bankrupt person or organisation and put in the control of the administration, the public administration in the form of the curatore. So they're no longer in the possession of the original owner, even though the original owner still owns the assets legally. So then there will be an inventory listing all the assets, so that the curatore must know what assets are available, maybe to be sold or used in some way to generate more money, more. Remember, the curatore is always a kind of arm for the creditors. He represents obviously the interests of everybody, but particularly the creditors. He's looking after their interests. The whole process of bankruptcy often is for the creditors' interest, to safeguard the creditors' investments, not to do the interests of the bankrupt person or organisation. So we've got to remember the curatore will be thinking a lot about what's good for the creditors, how to maximise the process, the returns from the process for the creditors' interests. Normally there won't be anything else left after the creditors have had all their repayments, so it's not really for the interest of the bankrupt. Okay, then he has to inform all the creditors that, you know, there's this, it's been declared bankrupt by the court, and there's this process in action, and if they want to participate, if they want some money, they have to fill out the correct forms called the insinuazione di credito, and then they will be considered for repayment when the assets are sold, etc. So there's this concorso, they say in Italiano. Then you've got the liquidation process, the liquidazione dell'attivo. So this is the sales of the assets, and maybe they go to an auction, asti, where they must be auctioned off, sold for the maximum possible. All the time the curatore will be communicating with the creditors, the committee of creditors, to make sure they're happy with the process and see what their opinions are on different decisions. And so they will, sell the assets, but also any other activity that maximises the patrimony, for example, trying to recuperate debts of the debtor, so they can increase the patrimony, or maybe even, operating the business a little bit so they generate profit, a little bit profit to create maybe finishing projects or etc. And then you've got the ripartizione dell'attivo, where the money is distributed to the creditors. So this, we're going to remember, the money must respect the order of payments according to the law. The Codice Civile decides, and there will be privileged classifications. So some creditors will be privileged if they have a pegno or ipoteco, etc. And some will have to wait. They'll be in a group that's a classification that's not so privileged, and they'll have to wait until the privileged creditors get paid, and the workers, for example, are the most privileged, or the tax man, etc. And then probably the bank if they've asked for credit guarantees on their credit, etc. But then within their classifications, there's a principle of equality of treatment. So if there's only 50% left for the unprivileged creditors, then everyone will get 50% of their debt. So there won't be just some with everything and some creditors with nothing. Everyone gets the same percentage within that classification. So then finally you have the chiusura del fallimento e esdebitazione. This is the phase where the bankruptcy is closed, and the esdebitazione is actually when all the debts get written off. So if there's still debts and all the assets have been sold and still creditors aren't paid, the following, all the rest of the debts are written off. It doesn't follow the organisation or a person around through life. This esdebitazione won't happen if there's been some behaviour that's not correct. For example, if a bankrupt person has been trying to siphon off funds for a friend, saying he owes his friend all this money and it's not true, or making false accounts, etc., then he won't reach the phase where the debts are written off, and he may have to be responsible for the debts all through until they're fully paid. And also, this is actually a criminal offence if you have a fraudulent bankruptcy where you've changed the accounts and made misrepresentations and tried to take money out of the company where you shouldn't have. It is actually a penal offence and you can go to prison. So it's a bit more serious than just owing money.